start playing with it outside of class. Even the stuff that we do in the class, it helps to just kind of go through those steps again to make it a repetitive process. You need to build the connections in your brain, in your arm, in your eyes, and everything you do to really help reinforce what we're doing. It just makes your life a lot easier, okay? We're starting week 4, and it's obviously 16 weeks in the class, so we're going to start going really quick in a few weeks when we start working on stuff. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is in your folder on the P drive, in your 2510 work folder, we need to make a new project folder. Now, we don't want to just make a new folder here and start doing that, right? Because Maya automatically does that for us, okay? So on your P drive, on your name, on 2510, on work, we're going to create a new folder through Maya, okay? So in Maya, we're going to go to File and say Project Window. Okay, so File, Project Window. This opens up the project window area. This is where we create the project, okay? Before we were working on the space scene, so we called it Sarcona Space, or whatever you called it. This one is going to be a text logo, so you're going to label it your last name underscore text logo. So we click the word new first, give it a name, and then make sure the location is your folder, your work folder. Okay, so that's what you should see is your last name underscore text logo for the project, and the location should be your work folder, no further. When you're done, you can hit accept. Now in my work folder, I have this file structure for text logo, and I also have the file structure for space. So if I came in next class and I'm like, hey, I want to work on space, I have to tell Maya I'm working on the space scene. So you're not doing this part, I'm going to do this just so you can see it. I go to File, Set Project, and I say, hey Maya, I want to work on space. And I set it. And now if I go to File, Open, it automatically jumps me right into my space scenes folder, and I could open up my space scene from here, okay? If I want to work on my text logo, I don't just navigate to it. I have to tell Maya, hey Maya, I want to work on my text logo. And I say set. And now Maya knows I'm working on my text project, okay? And that just keeps everything organized. So every time you come in, File, Set Project. That's the #1 thing you need to do. Preferences, you can get away with not needing preferences ever. You can get away with the defaults. But setting your project is not something that you can get away from, okay? Become very anal about making sure all your stuff is nice and organized, and if it's not, figure out why it's not, okay? Usually when I see it, it's beyond finding your stuff, and it's like there's files here and there and all over the place, and we have to kind of bring them all together, and then you have all the work of relinking everything inside of Maya, which is a pain. All right, so we have that part done. Now what we need to do is go into Illustrator. So go to the window key and you can type in Illustrator, and you'll open up Illustrator. All right, so we're gonna go to a new document. Doesn't matter the size. Control N, hit enter. Okay, then we're going to go to the text tool, and you're just going to click and then type in a word. I'm going to do Sean, and I'm going to do it in all caps. Okay. Now there's nothing fancy that we need to do with this. If you do have a fancy font, mine defaulted to Myriad Pro Regular. I'm fine with Myriad Pro Regular. Now when we get into Maya, I may need to go with a bolder font. Okay, if you have something in your name where the lines come really close together, Maya may not like that and it might freak out. So adding a bolder font may alleviate some of that stuff. The other thing is, in here, this is a vector image, okay? That's vector text. If I brought that into Maya, it wouldn't read it at all. So it needs to be an actual like vector drawing path type thing. And I also need to make sure it's pretty big, otherwise it's going to come in super small in Maya. So I'm going to highlight my text and make my text as big as I can make it, 72 points. Okay, I can type more obviously, but 72 is a good size. All right. So Sean, there's my name, 72 points. It's a non-serif font, so I don't have anything fancy like that. Okay, that would not work very good inside Maya. It's possible that it would work. You could try it and bring it in, but for right now, we're just going to pick something plain. There's Myriad Roman, that's fine too. There we go. Okay, so now I need to take this and make it into actual piece of graphic and not a piece of text. Okay, Maya doesn't read the text like this. So I'm going to go to type. I'm going to go to type and say create outlines. Okay. Now that I've created outlines, I have paths. Okay. So now all I need to do once I have my paths is to just save it. So I'm just going to save my file. And I'm going to put it inside my text logo images or source images folder. There we go. And I'm going to call this name.ai. Okay, so I just put it inside of my folder, my text logo folder, inside source images, and I call it name. Now, the one thing we do need to change is we can't have it be an Illustrator CC file. An Illustrator CC file brings with it all this extra baggage that Maya doesn't like. Okay, so we actually have to save it back to an Illustrator H file. Okay.
What do you save it as?
A regular Illustrator file, but when we get the options, we're picking Illustrator 8. Okay. Now, depending on your version of Illustrator, I know some of them you had to go to Save As in order to save it as an Illustrator 8, or you had to go to Export to save it as Illustrator 8. In this version, and I think CS6, I believe, both of them were just save, and then you get this little pop-up, and you tell it you want to save it as Illustrator 8. Okay. So I'm going to show that process again just so you can see it, because it's, obviously you need to be able to do that. So a new file, doesn't matter the size. I'll do Sarcona. I'll do my full name just so you can see how ridiculous it's going to be. John W. Sarcona. There we go, and I'll make this 72. And I will create outlines from there, and then save it as name 2. And you'll see, even though we use the hotkeys inside Maya, and we had a hotkey test inside Maya, I'm still using hotkeys from After Effects and through Illustrator and Photoshop and all these other programs. Then I save it as Illustrator 8, and it gets rid of all the junk we don't need. Wonderful. Okay? So that's it. That's all we have to do. Make the text, create outlines, save it as Illustrator 8. Okay? Now we could, if we're not using text, let's say this is a real logo, as long as it's paths, we're good. So we could actually just draw paths inside here and bring those into Maya, and everything will be cool too. All right? So now we're going to jump into Maya. If you want this hotkey, this is a cool one to have. Hold down the Alt key and you can hit Tab, and it'll switch between programs. Okay, Windows Tabs does the fancy one. It does that one. Okay. So now what we want to do is we have this text file, this Adobe Illustrator file. We need to bring it into Maya and create geometry with it. Okay. Inside of Illustrator, you're dealing with paths. We can bring paths into Maya and we can use them for other stuff. But when we hit the render button, we get nothing because they're just paths. They're just like empty stuff. So we're going to go to Create, and guess what from here, which one we're going to choose? Adobe Illustrator R object. I don't know why they are there. That seems kind of weird. Maybe it's copywritten. So yes, we're going to go to Create Adobe Illustrator object, and then we'll go to our source images. Oh, I'm still set on the other project. That's why it's not there. There we go. Create Adobe Illustrator object. Oops. And then I go to, why is it still going back to the spacing? Hold on. All right, for whatever reason, mine's still going to the spacing, so I'm going to go to my text logo and then go to source images and grab name. Okay. Now, when you go to that, you'll see that it pops up somewhere in your scene. There's my name. Okay. So it may be off to the bottom right. It might be centered perfectly. It might be off to the top right. It really depends on where you saved that piece of text, where you wrote it here. If I put this way down here, it's going to show up different than way up here. Okay. So it doesn't matter where it's at. We just need to know where it is. Okay. We'll also notice that when we click on it and we're in the Move tool, you'll see that our pivot is like way up. Our pivot's like way up here and our text is way down there. So we want to center pivot. So if you have the hotkey in your shelf, click the hotkey. Otherwise, you can go to Modify and say Center Pivot. Okay, so that centers our pivot. So then we can just hold down the X key. Okay, what does the X key do?
Grid.
Snaps to the grid. Okay, so we're going to hold down X, and the center area we're just going to click and drag and try to bring it right to the center of our grid. Okay, so you hold down X, click and drag the center until it gets right at the center of our grid. Okay, then we can just grab the green arrow and just pull it up until it's sitting right on the grid. All right, now in the Maya world, it actually doesn't matter where this object is at. Okay, it could be a mile from the origin, but we like to keep everything centered at the origin because just like our planets, it's easier that way because everything we create gets created right there. So if we're trying to keep everything nice and uniform, it makes things a lot easier. Okay, so here's our text sitting at the origin. Now we want to adjust some of our parameters. If you look at my U, we can look at the S also, you can see that the sides of the S are very blocky. Okay, even if you have an O, like if I had Sarcona up there instead of Sean, we would have an O in there, and sometimes that would be very blocky too. So what we can do is we can adjust these parameters. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control, hold Control and hit A, and that'll bring up our attribute editor. All right, now this came in already beveled, and beveling is what it does. It takes our curve, and then around a curve it puts us bevel on there to give it actual geometry. So inside of our attribute editor, there's tabs up at the top. One of them is called Bevel Plus. Okay, so this is where all the beveling happens, is in this Bevel Plus tab. So if we adjust any of these things, there's the bevel width. Okay, there's the bevel depth. Here's the extrude distance. Okay, we can adjust these kinds of parameters. And all these are doing is just adjusting what that bevel looks like as far as sizing. Okay, so if you look at this, the bevel starts here and ends there. So if I change the width of this, you can see how it's changing the height of that basically. If I go to the depth, it's changing the depth of that. If I go to the extrude distance, it's adjusting the center. Okay, so we can adjust that all day long. So again, don't be afraid to go back and adjust that kind of thing. You'll also notice that at the very top of this, it says Input Curves, Illustrator for Bevel 1. Now what do you think would happen if we took this one file and we brought it to a different computer and tried to open it?
Error out, did not bring the Illustrator file.
Right, it would error out because it doesn't have the Illustrator file. Okay, so that's why we have to make sure we've created that project folder, because now when we go to a different computer, we just set our project and it knows your Illustrator file is right here. Okay, if we didn't save it in there, Maya's not going to know where it is and it freaks out and you have to find it. And sometimes you can't get it back, so just be aware of that. Now, in some cases, the beveling doesn't work correctly. Let me show you a case where it's not going to work correctly. So I'm going to go in here to my text, and I'm just going to go like that. Perfect. And I'm going to pick a fancy font, like that Mistrial one.
That's Minion.
It is Minion. I click Mistrial. There we go.
Oh, no, that's Minion.
OK. So now we'll take this, and we'll make that outlines, and we'll take that and save it. And this is a weird font. And we save it as Illustrator 8. Ooh, Japanese Illustrator 3. That's a weird one.
Oddly specific.
Right. Not sure why you would need that. All right. So same thing. Create Illustrator object. Weird one. Hopefully Maya doesn't die. There we go. All right. So it came in, but if you look at it, look at that. There's like chunks missing from certain areas, and there's extra chunks in other areas. Okay. So in this case, that font that I chose is not compatible with this kind of bevel. Okay. So I could go through and tweak some of those settings in order for that to be happier. Okay. So I could go into this and maybe take the bevel width down. Okay, and sometimes that'll help. It really didn't help in this case. The other thing I can do is you see there's an outer style curve and an inner style curve. I don't need to click on this arrow. I could, but I like to use these top arrows. Okay, so here's my inner, or my Illustrator file right there. There's my Illustrator file. Here's my inner style curve, and I can choose a different style. So that was straight out. This is straight in, and here's convex out. Okay, now these are changing this inner portion right here. That's what the inner style curve is. The outer style curve is going to change the outside stuff. Okay, there it is, straight in. Okay, oh, there's a good one. So this is another thing that'll happen too with this, is that as it's trying to figure out how do I take these curves and make it actual geometry, sometimes you just get a funky error like that, and it just needs to be worked around. Okay, so that's why I said not to pick any font that's too crazy, because the more crazy it is, the easier these kinds of things happen. All right. Now the other thing we can do is, someone mentioned before, just going to create text. I'm sorry, not create text. Going to create text, and this is where you can actually just type it in. Okay, so if I want to type in a word, hit create, it'll create that word right there without me having to go into Illustrator and do all that stuff, which is an acceptable way too. But I could also go to import, go into my source images, go into my weird name. There we go. And you'll see in here we get our text. And you'll see that this doesn't have everything nice and clean. You'll see that my text, my curves, are actually like separated. They're actually like curves on top of curves. And that's probably why it's not doing a good job of blending all this stuff together. Okay. Now I could also grab these individually, and under my modeling menu, under surfaces, somewhere in here, there it is, Bevel Plus. I could just hit Bevel Plus, and you'll see how it creates that individual character right there. Okay, so I could also do this individually and then tweak it as I go. And if I get areas that need more work, I could grab the individual curve, hit F8 to get to the points. Holy cow, it's a lot of points. And then I could tweak those points to modify the shape of that specific object. Okay. So just so you're aware of why we aren't doing certain things and some of the other options. Okay. Ours text most likely came in perfect. I didn't see any that look like they're really off, so we're good. All right. So again, we can go back to the Bevel Plus. We can adjust these outer style curves or inner style curves to change the different shapes. My favorite one is maybe not that one. Convex crease? Yeah, convex crease is my favorite. It looks the fanciest. See? We just clicked on it, and then we go to the tabs on top, to the inner style curves and the outer style curves, and we just change it to convex crease if that's the one you wanted to go with. And if you do change it, you may have to go back to Bevel Plus and lower some of your widths. They don't like that little black spot I'm getting on the top of this. There we go. Okay. So again, this is all stuff that you can play with at any point. All right. The thing that we want to adjust in here, I'm just going to set this back to point 1. There we go. And for this one, my A is not really cutting it. With this bevel style that I chose, the bevel for the A, which should be just coming to a point, is actually like crossing over, and I'm getting this like black triangle at the top. So just for my own sanity, I'm just going to change this to a different one. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Straight out would work. Okay. So that'll be sufficient for what I'm doing. All right. The next thing I want to do is go back to that bevel plus and go down to where it says tolerance. Okay. Anytime you see the word tolerance, it's basically like how specific, how exact do you want the software to be. Okay, if this is set to something like 1, we're probably not going to see a huge difference, if anything. I mean, I'm not seeing any difference because it's, you know, it's pretty easy to figure out the solution for the software. Okay, but there are some times when that it's basically like you have a curve here and there's something kind of off, and basically Maya is just doing a guesstimate the entire time. So if I lower this tolerance, it has no tolerance for that, 0.001, okay? It just makes it a little bit more exact in how it calculates this kind of stuff. Okay, in this case, we're not really seeing it. I just want to point that out because tolerance is something you'll see throughout the entire software. There'll be several spots you'll see tolerance. The lower the number, the more accurate it is, okay? The next area we're going to go down to is polygon output options. Okay, and with polygon output options, this is what's controlling how many divisions are going around this. So you can see the blockiness of the U right there. It might not look very blocky right now, but when we render it, it'll definitely look blocky. So if I go to my curve span and I start to pull this up more, you can see how I'm adding more divisions going around the bowl of that U. Okay, go the other way. Now it's a shaven. Okay, obviously you can get different effects, whatever. For this one, I want it nice and round, so I'm going to crank this up to maybe 23. Okay, so I've taken the curve span up to 23, giving me more roundness happening here and more roundness happening there. Okay, now what it's doing is it's adding more divisions, right? So if I take this down further, you can see how we have less divisions. I have one division right here to there. See this line right here and that line right there? That's a division, okay? Now just keep an eye on that as I add more to this. I go to 2, and now I have 2 divisions here and 2 divisions there. I go to 3, and now I have 3 divisions, okay? So it's basically just adding more divisions every time I crank that up. Now what that does is allow more smoothness inside there. Now you may say, well, why not just crank it up all the way? Why not just put that 19 up to 50 and get something really smooth? We don't do that because then it'll slow the station down, okay? And there may not be any difference between 19 and, I'm not going to type it in, but 119, okay? There may not be a difference, so we don't care about that. So that's what that one's going to do. Now the other one, I'm just going to go over here so we can see this. You can see that it's also blocky going this way. This should be nice and round, but you can see it's kind of blocky here. So this extrusion section, I can pull the divisions up on this to make that nice and round as well. Okay, so I went to 7 and 19, and I got some pretty good results. Every time you do something like this, you have to go through and analyze it per scene. Okay, so in this specific case with this specific word, 7 and 19 are my magic numbers. Okay, and I always double check. I'll click off. kind of spin around, see if I'm liking how everything's looking. I'm not really happy with this N right here. You can see there's another black spot. So I'm going to go to my outer curve and just change that back to straight out. There we go. All right, so for the most part, that's good. Okay, and again, anytime we can come back and change this, it's not locked in yet. Okay, the only time it's locked in is when we click this button right here. All right, once we hit delete history, our word that we have is locked into that word. Okay, now just so you can see this also, here's my Illustrator for Bevel 1. Here's the link. I can click on my second name, and now what Maya's going to do is it's going to go find that new piece of text and update my settings. So now here is my Sean W. Sarcona, holy cow, it's a long name, text right here. Okay, and it updated all of it, so it has the same bevel, it has the same divisions and everything. Okay, now this is what I was talking about before with kind of framing things. I'm going to put this blue square on. In order for me to see this whole name, look at how far back I have to be from this. Okay? If I change this to my original one, look at how close I can be to that and have it fill the screen. Okay? So just be aware that you don't want to have something crazy long like that. You can always try to think of a different way to break it up. Sometimes you can bring, if you needed something that big, you could bring like one word, another word in there to make it kind of piece in there, or tell the story a different way, stack them on top or whatever. Okay, so there's our text. It looks gorgeous. So now what we need to do is add a backdrop for this. So I'm going to jump to this here, and I'm going to go to perfect. So this is, in traditional sense, how they photograph stuff. Okay, what they do is that they take I'll go to this one because it's better. They take a platform and they put the item on the platform, and then they shine lights on it, and they create backdrops and whatever else. So in this case, they're using black as a backdrop because they want to create this reflection that's inside there. They're basically eliminating the shadow or reducing the shadow and then creating this nice reflection in here. And they're using all this white to help bounce some light into that image, into that purse, so that you can see some of that stuff. Okay, this one, I'm not sure what that is. I don't know. But it looks like it's floating or being held up. Maybe it's on this platform. And again, we have these big horizontal lights or big vertical lights casting lights on here to create these big, long, thin strips of light. Okay, here's another one. There's a big white bounce card here, big white card here, white on the ground, and then the item is going to go somewhere in there. Here's another one. This has a backdrop that's kind of rounded, and the items are just sitting on top of it, and they have a light above, a light this way, and a light that way. The reason I'm showing these is because it's important to be able to kind of analyze how lighting is in a real situation, so we can then apply it to the 3D world. Okay, so in this case, in our 3D world here, that's our product. Let me turn this off. There we go. That's our product that we want to photograph, okay, or videotape, or whatever we're doing with this. So we're going to create this rounded backdrop. Okay, just like the one in the drawing there, we want to create this illusion that there's no seam to this piece. Okay, for some things, like I think the FX one, there is like a hard line that goes across because it's FX and it's hard and it's a guy's channel, right? But I'm dainty, so I want nice, soft, smooth background. So we're going to create a polygon plane. So create a polygon plane and scale it up enormous. Like bigger than your grid big. Make sure it's a polygon and not a NURBS plane. All right, so then we're gonna hit All right, so we're in the attribute editor. We're going to go to the polyplane, and we're going to reduce our subdivisions to 3 and 3. Okay. So we've created a polygon plane. We reduced our subdivisions width to 3 and the height to 3. And then what I want to do is I want to take one of these edges and pull it up so that I get this nice rounded surface. Okay. So I'm going to hold down the right mouse button right on that plane and go to edge. Okay, that turns blue. That means we know we're in component mode. That means I can grab this edge, hold down shift, click this edge, hold down shift still, click that edge, and then let go of shift. And then we're just going to move it up. Okay, so 3 and 1, 3 and 1, okay? And this will actually render out how, if we have it in 3, it'll render nice and smooth inside Mental Ray. Okay, remember we talked about Mental Ray and Maya? Mental Ray is a bit more exact and Maya's not. So that's what we want to do. Now I also want to look at this scene, and you might see something like this. Like if I look at my name, I'm actually looking underneath the plane, but my name is cutting off, okay? This 3 hotkey is just a preview. So don't be upset if you're like this far away and you're seeing something like that happen. As long as when we get close to this, we don't see it. And I am seeing it, so I gotta fix it. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to object mode. So I hold down the right mouse button and I go to object mode. Okay, then I can click on this big plane and just push the plane backwards. Okay, and again, I'm just grabbing the arrows. I'm not grabbing the center, just grabbing the arrow I want to push back and pushing it back so that my name is not underneath. And then while I'm at it, I'm also going to go to my scale tool and grab the red in my case and just scale this really far up. Okay, so I want it really long. See how big I scaled up that side. Okay, now here's the reason we did that huge scale. I'm going to put this back to where it was. We'll pull that out. I'm going to go back to, I don't know what it was, 100 or so. Okay, as I'm in here looking at my name, it might look cool right there. And I'm like, cool, I don't see any of that blackness showing outer space. But the second I start to turn even a little bit, you see that tiny little corner right there that screams to someone, this is fake, get out of here. Okay, so we take that and we stretch it up really far so that as we're inside it, look at that. See how far I can go and still, way down there, yeah, but I can angle it good. And if I needed to, I could even go crazy with this. I can grab the top here and pull it up even higher. I can grab the front of this and pull it forward, okay? So we can really go bananas and make sure that there's no seam anywhere inside this scene of what we're doing. Now again, this is all preliminary. This is all just planning ahead, knowing that this is going to need to be done. When we get to the final steps of rendering it, we may realize that we can need to go a little bit further or higher or forward or whatever, okay? So don't think we're ever locked in. We can always come back and change that stuff, make it better, okay? So there's my name, there's my backdrop. Now what I want to do is I want to create some lights inside my scene. So we're going to go to Create Lights. And there's 2 sections, and you'll see that this bottom section says Mental Ray. For now, just avoid using those, okay? It has some issues with some of the shaders right now, so we're not going to use any of these at the moment. But we are going to use this area light, the nice yellow area light, right there, okay? So before, when we did the solar system, what kind of light did we use? Directional, okay? And a directional light works. All the light is basically parallel, shining on one object. This, if we move this up, is a square, okay? And there's a little stick sticking out of the square. That's where our light is shining out of, all right? So if I put this, just so you can see it, if I put this behind my text and I were to render this, you'll see that I don't see my text because my light is shining this way and my text is behind it. Okay? So just be aware that that little stick needs to point at what we want to see. Now here's what's going to make this easier. Now watch how I set mine up. Okay? Just like our pictures here, I want to do this kind of setup. Okay? Because what this kind of setup does is it gives us some nice overall lighting to our scene. So I'm going to put one of my lights off to the center, or off of the center. But I still need it to aim at my text. Okay? So apart from me standing right behind this light and trying to rotate it to get it to be lined up right at that text, which can be a bit difficult to do, I'm going to use the T key. So if I hit T, you'll see that I get two arrows. Okay? One arrow is my light source. The other arrow is what my light's pointing at. So I'm going to take my light pointing arrow and just leave it right on my text. All right, so now that we have a light here and it's pointing at our object, we want to set up some parameters to make it look more realistic. Okay? Just so you can see what mine looks like when I hit the render button. Not very realistic. Okay? The settings on the light by default are not set up for your specific scene. So every single time you make a light, you need to adjust the parameters. It could have been, 90% there, but I still need to adjust it that extra 10%. So we do everything in the attribute editor. So we hit Control A, and that takes us into the attribute editor. And I'm going to take my decay rate. This is the first thing I want to adjust. Take your decay rate to quadratic. Okay, the little drop-down menu that says decay rate, we just change it to quadratic. And what that's going to do is tell our light not to be the same intensity forever. Okay, the light will drop off from the surface of the light source. Now because we did that, I have to adjust my intensity. My intensity is going to be different than your intensity. I'm going to try like something like that. I don't know how many zeros it is, but something like that. And then I'm going to hit the render button again, and I'm going to see if I can actually see something. Holy cow, it's too bright. Okay? So the best thing to do is always go with lots of zeros and then dial it back. Okay? All right. Keep adding zeros. Now, if you don't have mental ray on your system, or it's not turned on, I noticed a couple of them did not have mental ray as the default. Remember, we go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, and then from here you'll turn on Maya to MR. Okay, so if you don't see mental ray when you hit the render button, then you need to go up to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, and turn on Maya to MR. Why? So other stuff we need to adjust, and this is something every single time that you're going to light stuff for this class, these are settings that you're going to set. We're always going to take our area light and make it quadratic. We're always going to take the intensity and scale it up, typically up, to get it to be the right size. Okay? There's only a few cases where you would want to do something outside of that, where maybe you're like, I just need just a fill light basically for this entire scene. Just kind of like overall, maybe you wouldn't use the decay, but typically you're going to use the decay. All right, so we're going to go under the mental ray section, and we're going to click on the two checkboxes, use light shape, and then visible. And then for the high samples, we're going to set it to 1 instead of 8. Okay, so use light shape under mental ray area light, visible, and then take the high samples to 1. Okay. Yes. So now what that's going to do is it may blow out your system. Okay. What it's doing is actually using the light's shape, that size, as a light source. And it's using that as a multiplier for the rest of the stuff. So now again, crank back that number to something that's more reasonable. There we go. So what's going to happen to this scene when I duplicate this light and I add another light into my scene? It's going to get more blown out, okay? So typically when you light your stuff, you want to kind of plan ahead and say, I'm going to add 3 lights into this scene. So here, if I'm using 1 light, that may work, but I'm going to be using 3 lights. So I'm going to have to like take this down. So I'm going to put this to like 2000 instead of whatever it was at, okay? So I just basically like cut it into a third-ish. Okay, again, we can update all the stuff after. Right now, it's just kind of like getting a basic idea of where our lights are coming in at. I'm going to duplicate the light with my T key still on, and then all I have to do is slide the other one over. Okay, I'm also going to make this one a little bit bigger. Control D is your duplicate. Yep, as long as T was on before, it'll stay on. Okay. In my specific example, if I zoom far out enough, you can see that I still have areas that are blown out just because of where I'm at and where those lights are at. But I don't plan on going back that far into my scene to even see it. You can also see that the lights, my area lights, are creating these like lines that are going around the area, okay? So that's all stuff that when I shoot this, I avoid seeing all that kind of stuff. I just wanted to create the illusion that way up here, right there, I have good lighting. Okay, that's all I need to do is I need to create the illusion that in this area that I'm rendering my stuff out, I have nice soft lighting. Okay, so again, don't worry about getting it too locked into those, you know, getting it perfect. We can adjust all the stuff. The biggest thing is knowing something doesn't look right about it, okay? And every step of the way, you can kind of get an eye for that setup. All right, so now that we have some basic lights in there, now we can start to texture our stuff, okay? So I'm gonna grab my ground first, so my plane that's in the background, I just marquee it. And then we go to the hot box, so we hold down the space bar. We go to lighting and shading on the bottom left, and we say assign new material. Okay, so we clicked on the background, held down the space bar, oops, went to lighting and shading, went to assign new material. And then from here, remember which material we're going to use.
What was the third one you said?
Lighting and shading, assign new material. We're going to use the Mia material X passes. Okay, for the background, I want to create kind of like a, it's not perfectly flat, okay, but it's somewhat flat coloring, okay? It's basically just be a flat color with a little bit of shine to it. That's going to be like a off-white, okay, barely off-white color, all right? So there's 2 tabs that we get. This one is the shading group. This one is the Mia material X passes shader itself material. So we're going to rename this Mia material X passes, the one with the little sphere and the one with all the settings. We're going to have background, enter. So I'm going to pick something in the orangish, yellowish realm. I'm really going to take the saturation down because I don't want to overpower it with this color. I want it to be very desaturated, like that. Okay? So whatever color you picked, make sure it's a desaturated color, because what we want to happen is our word is what's going to pop. Okay? So that word should be the most vibrant color on there, not our background. Our background is our background. All right, so then we can come down to roughness and pull the roughness up a smidge, like to 0.7-ish. I'm going to take my reflectivity down a bit. I'm going to take my glossiness down a bit. Okay, and then my glossy sample is the 1. Okay, glossiness is down a bit, reflection's down a bit, samples are at 1. And this should create just a tinted background. That's all I'm after, is just a nice little tinted background. And I'll do one with some crazy color in it, just so you can see what a crazy color is going to look like. There you go. So you can see a crazy color inside here. You can see how much my text is going to have to compete for space. Here, you know, things kind of like blend nicely together. There, my text is really going to have to stand out in order for it to be readable on that pink background. Okay? So if I wanted pink, I would really take that pink down, desaturating wise. And have just the slightest hint of it inside there. Okay? But again, don't be afraid to play with it to see different things. You can see the different looks that I'm getting with just that little bit of a coloring. Here is it more of a yellow, here is it more of a pink. Okay? This is a cool website if you haven't been to this before. This is called color.adobe.com, but this helps you pick colors that go together. So over here they have different rules with coloring, and you're picking a main color, like a key color, and it helps you pick other colors that are inside there. Okay, other colors that go together. So if I went to that like pink color that I was just at, like that, you can see that these other colors would go with it. So for my word, if I chose something in the pink realm and I wanted the wording to match, I should find something that matches it like this. I should find, you know, one of these colors here or there that blend nicely to it. Okay? Or something like this. There's the pink that I chose, and then I would pick this green. But again, I think it'd be too hard on the eyes to even look at. Okay? So once you have your background, then you can go to your text and assign a new material. Assign a Mia. And what I'm going to do for my color is I'm choosing the exact same color. So I chose for the color itself, this last swatch that was in here was the color I chose on the other one. So I'm going to take that and take the saturation up to like 0.75. And then I'm going to take my color swatch and take it down to like 100. And that should give me two colors that are at least relatable. I'm going to take my value down a bit too. There we go. All right, now here's another thing that we want to take note of is what the shadows look like, not just what the lighting looks like, but the shadows too. I scaled my lights down super tiny right there, okay? And then I'm going to look at my object, rendered again. Now because of some of the settings that we set up, what this should do is it should cause some hard shadows to be in there, okay? They're not super hard right now, but they are a lot harder than they were before. So the story with this is the smaller your lights are, the sharper your shadows are going to be. So don't be afraid to make them huge in order to kind of minimize the shadowing that's happening inside your scene. Okay, so I literally scaled up my lights really, really big because I wanted those shadows to basically kind of feather off and just disintegrate. I didn't want them to be so hard that I can see every single light source, because that's typically another giveaway that we're in 3D, because we can see shadows going in this direction, shadows going in this direction, shadows going backwards. It just makes it very obvious that it's 3D. The other thing is this white line right here. What's that white line? Yes, it's a reflection of my light. So here's where I can look at my lights that I have out here and say, you know what, this is probably just way too big. And I can grab that edge and just pull it in. And by pulling that edge in, what should happen is that my lights are no longer reflecting that sharp brightness. I may need to pull it in more, but it definitely should be better. Yes, it's definitely better than it was. Okay, where I don't have that hard edge right there. Okay, so those are all things that we need to adjust as we go on and do this. Okay, so other stuff you can keep adjusting. The colors, you can adjust your lights. It's good as a beginner to start writing a list of all the areas and things you've adjusted so you know where to go back to. If you're looking at your scene and you're like, hey, the shadows are really crisp, where did he say to change that? Having your list, you know, shadows, grab the light, make it bigger, that makes softer shadows. Or if I need them crisper, shrink it down, crisper shadows, okay? So now the next thing we want to do is create a little flyby of this, okay? So this is where we can get kind of creative and do, you know, like, and go like through the A, all right, or something like that. Now we want to do a reveal on this. We don't want it to be like this, and then we go into it. We want to reveal so we kind of like pop out of it. Okay, so in this case what I'm doing is just going through the letter A. But I could also, careful of my background there, I could also come around like this, oops, go through the S, and then kind of swing across. So before you do anything, do a little planning. But the next step of this is going to be the same. And you could do multiple cameras. So if you're not sure if you like this camera or 20 other ones, you can set up multiple cameras, okay? And they're all free, so you have to worry about buying them. So if I go to Panels, Perspective, and I go to New, so you see where the Panels, Perspective, New is. It makes me a brand new camera. Panels, Perspective, New. This is also how we can swap between cameras. So I can go to my perspective, which is my default, or perspective 1, which is my new camera. Okay? So by default, your camera comes in with the exact same settings as your other one did. I like to change my focal length. So over here where it says focal length in the channel box, or you can hit Control-A to get the outliner, and there's your focal length. I'm going to adjust this to like 19. Okay. I chose 19 as a random number. I'm pretty sure 10 is going to be too much perspective, and going more than 35 is going to pretty much flatten me out. So 19 might be good, where I can really make this lettering and this text look huge. Okay. Just so you can see why we did that. See 19, how big the text looks and how in perspective it looks. Let me go to 100. And it looks pretty flat right there. Okay. At 19, I had some good lines on there that made it look like I had some nice perspective, especially from here. Look at how nice this looks. It really looks like I'm like at the bottom of this looking up at those letters. At 100, See, everything looks flat. It doesn't look like we have some nice perspective. Okay, so 19 should be a good value. All right. So now before I set up my camera and do my final move animation on this, I want to click on this blue ball right here. So this little blue circle that's right under the word show. See the word show? Right under it is a blue circle. I click that. Okay. This is what's going to render when we actually render out. Okay. Whatever's inside this box. All right. So if I want to make sure that I ride right along the A or right along the top of my letters, that's where I want to make sure that that box is in. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside the A, like that. And I'm just going to make sure that my perspective view is clicked here. And I hit S. Okay. I haven't adjusted my frames. I'm at frame 1 already, which is exactly where I want to be. And then I hit S, and we're good. Then I would go to 120 and go to where I want my end frame to be. And then hit S again. Okay. So now this is my animation. Whoops, I go through the S but not the right way. So I'm going to go here to about 40. Reline me up to that. And then hit S again. Hit S again. Okay, so I come out of the A like this. And then swing down to get that shot. Okay, so that'll be one of your final steps. It doesn't mean it's the actual final step because, like I said before, at any point we can always go back to the beginning and adjust stuff. Now, what's one thing we should probably do right about now? Save. We don't save this at all. Name. Oops. Sarcona underscore name. Underscore 01. There we go.
Was this save scene?
Just save scene, yep. Okay. So now you essentially have all the tools that you're going to need to do this project. We started off in Illustrator. We typed our text. We created outlines. We saved it as Illustrator 8. We brought it into Maya as an Illustrator object. We adjusted the curvature of our bevel. We created our backdrop. We lit the thing. We textured the thing. We created an animated camera. Okay? So now it's essentially, it's done. The last steps of this is just kind of going back and refining and tweaking all of that. Okay? In a project sense, this part here that we just did may take an hour, maybe a half hour to do. Okay? On a bigger project, definitely that. The next 10% of this, the tweaking and refining and adjusting it, that may take an extra 2 hours or 3 hours to adjust it. My advice to you is to make a brand new one. Start from scratch. Go back in Illustrator. Make a brand new word. Now that you've seen the process, you should be able to fluently go back and do this. Okay?